So just a few reminders before we get started. We ask that attendees keep your microphones and videos off during the presentations. However, we do encourage you to submit any questions you have in the chat, and our SPEA representatives will collect your questions for our Q&A happening after the presentations. As I mentioned, we will be recording tonight's event. However, we ask that we encourage you to stick around for the entire event because we also have a draw which you can enter to win one of 5 $20 Amazon gift cards. A big thank you to the American College of Dentists and Dr. Lance Rucker for arranging that, for supporting us and generously providing funds for the draw. To enter, you can click on the link in the chat to enter your name and email address, and then please stick around to the end of the event when we will announce the winners. Tonight, we have the pleasure of hearing from 5 esteemed and experienced dentists who have all worked in rural or Indigenous communities from BC to the Maritimes. We have Dr. David Ciriani from BC, Dr. Sherry Mckinstry from Saskatchewan, Dr. Amrinderbir Singh from Saskatchewan, Dr. Luanne Viscanti from Ontario, and Dr. Mary McNally from Nova Scotia. To start our event, we've asked each of our panelists to share their experiences with us in a mini presentation, which is no easy feat considering how accomplished they each are. I'm pleased to also be joined by some of the SPEA chapter presidents from Canadian dental schools from across the country, who have also assisted in putting together this event together. I've asked each of them to participate by introducing the panelists from their region. So to start us off, I would like to ask Sherry Loo from Saskatchewan to introduce Dr. Sherry Mckinstry. Take it away, Serena.
Thanks, Caitlin. Okay, first of all, Dr. McKinstry, I just want to apologize for my pronunciation. I'm going to try my best. So, Dr. Sherry Mckinstry, Wabishkiwi Miradam Ochida Ikwe. Dr. McKinstry is Anishinaabe from Treaty 1 territory and is a proud member of the Saskatchewan First Nation in Manitoba. She is married with 4 children and honored to live and work on Treaty 6 territory. She is an assistant professor in the College of Dentistry at the University of Saskatchewan. Sherry's post-secondary academic career started in 1997 in the Access program at the University of Manitoba, where she completed a Bachelor of Science while completing the pre-dentistry requirements. She went on to complete a Doctor of Dental Medicine and a Bachelor of Science in Dentistry in 2005. Following graduation, Sherry contracted with the federal government to provide dental services in First Nations communities, where she continued to do so for over a decade, until she left to specialize in pediatric dentistry in 2017. She obtained a Master of Dentistry and diploma in pediatric dentistry during her residency at the Health Sciences Center and University of Manitoba in 2020. While providing dental services in First Nation communities, she also completed a Master of Public Health, specifically in the Indigenous Peoples Health Pathway at the University of Victoria in 2017. Please welcome Dr. Sherry Mckinstry.
Okay, so that was a really long introduction that I wasn't expecting, actually. And I don't seem to be able to flip out of here. So this is very, I have a picture in here that I do want to share if I can get this to work. Let's see if I can get this to work. Can you see the presentation? Okay, there we go. And so basically I was going to go through exactly what how I was introduced. So I am Status First Nations from Saskatchewan First Nation. Saskatchewan First Nation is located on Treaty 1 territory. Technically, as I was told by the chief as I went to go visit my community a couple of years ago, he said, technically we're also Treaty 3 and 5. So in our territory, just the very tips on each side. So a little north and a little east, we kind of touch on Treaty 3 and Treaty 5 territory as well. And that is something he's very proud of. And they actually have a poster in our band. So basically, I've been married for a very long time with 4 adult children now. As I went through dental school, my children were very young. So it made it very interesting to get through. And so we've all gone through this already. But before we go further, I do want to recognize that I am on Treaty 6 territory. So this is Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. So I just wanted to pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. So as was said earlier, I did graduate in 2005. I originally signed on with the University of Manitoba Center for Community Oral Health. And so there, the program provides service to underserved and vulnerable populations. For me, I was lucky enough to provide services to the MDC, which is the Manitoba Developmental Center in Portage la Prairie. And so that is an experience that will stay with me forever, and something that I was very proud that I was able to do. In the same year, I contracted with the federal government with FNIHB, which is First Nations and Inuit Health Branch in Manitoba. So originally I was given 3 communities to provide dental services to, so it was 3 communities in 1 month. And I was also very lucky in that the communities that I bid for, I had family ties to 2 of the 3 rural First Nation communities. And so I chose rural First Nation communities opposed to remote, because at that time my children were still young. Choosing to do rural First Nation communities gave me the opportunity to travel back and forth. After a day's work, I would just go home and spend my nights with my children and my weekends with my children and husband. And so as the children got older, I think it was getting harder to travel back and forth. There was one community that I kept for the 12 years actually. And so that was about a 3-hour drive, and 140 kilometers of that was on gravel road. So it wore me down quite a bit. So I was happy once my kids got a little bit older and I was able to stay in the communities during the week. And so that experience of being able to stay in the communities during the week was actually very fulfilling and very rewarding, because even though I had gone into the communities during the day and provided the services, staying in the communities allowed me to further bond with my community and also get to know the land as well. I spent a lot of time on the land and getting to know families. And as a matter of fact, I think I became adopted into a family. And during COVID, actually, my surrogate father had passed away. So unfortunately, I couldn't make it out to the funeral. But even the consideration of being labeled as his family, you know, just shows how welcoming the communities were, especially these communities. And while I had family ties in those communities, it was actually a family that I wasn't really related to that had adopted me in as their daughter, actually. And then also with their children that basically considered me siblings. So the potential for building relationships there were incredible, especially when I was able to stay in the communities. One of the good experience I had being able to stay in the community as well is I was able to participate in the powwows. I didn't get to participate too much in the actual ceremonies in those communities. For the ceremonies, I would drive to my home community. But one of the things I was able to do is it is a very interesting process of you know, going to pick the sweetgrass and the sage, and being able to tie yourself in with the land. For me, I hadn't been able to do that in my own community. So for me, that part was very, very important. I became very frustrated providing dental services in the Indigenous communities because, as I'll explain a little bit later, coming from approach to providing care in the dental community for Indigenous communities, we were expected to provide care as if we were providing care for the dominant society. And unfortunately, it was almost considering quantity over quality. The more we did, the more we were rewarded. And so it was getting frustrating, I think, doing dentistry that way. In addition to that, I had been there for so long that I think it was getting a little bit frustrating providing care, because when I graduated, I went into the communities and thought I would for sure end all dental surgeries and take care of all of the dental diseases. And that never happened. We never came close to that. And so that's actually what took me to a Master of Public Health at the University of Victoria, because I needed to know why. I needed to know why I wasn't making a difference. I was making a difference like in the day-to-day, but I wasn't making a difference in the future. And so that's what took me to the University of Victoria Master of Public Health program. And admittedly, I think that was also part of my own personal journey too, because my parents, my dad comes from history with the residential school system as well. And so I grew up in a particular, I guess, childhood that left me wondering why things were the way they were. And that's why I did the Master of Public Health. Okay. And then so in 2017, I left the communities where I went full-time to the University of Manitoba, where I completed the pediatric dentistry program. In 2019, here, and then this is why I made the list actually, because I knew I'd forget. In 2019, I had the opportunity to come here to the University of Saskatchewan while I was still in residency. So I came here and I had the opportunity to take 3 residents up to First Nation community and help introduce to not only pediatric dentistry, but also to the communities as well. So that was a really good experience. And as far as I am aware, the residents really appreciated the experience as well. And so in July 2020, I joined the University of Saskatchewan. So when I contracted, I did per diem. I was paid by the day. All of the dental coverage for First Nations and Inuit clients or community members were provided by NIHB. So basically that's coverage that's provided when there's no other social programs, private insurance plans, or provincial territorial health insurance available. At the time, we were also able to provide limited care to non-status and Métis clients with special considerations. And I had already gone over the quantity versus quality. So this is kind of like the best scenario that I can come up with to try get it in a couple minutes. So the problem that I found in providing dental care in the dominant community, and so this is not my picture, I just grabbed it off the internet, but providing dental care in the into Indigenous communities for the dominant society almost seems to be like it's an easy approach, but it doesn't consider the uniqueness of the communities that you're providing care to. And so here it's just kind of dumping it in there. So I found, even as I had gone through the Master of Public Health, I learned about cultural safety, awareness. And again, I'd learned through the history of Indigenous peoples in Canada. And that part made it not easy, but it helped explain a lot of the issues that I was having personally, and also the issues that I was having providing dental care in the communities. And so when you're in the dental communities providing care, you really have to consider your community carefully. So each community is very unique. And they're unique not only from the dominant society, but they're also unique from each other as well. So what works in one community won't work in another community. So with each community, it's really important to work with each of the communities until you find a solution of what's going to work best for them. And so having that communication, basically it's consultation, even though I had done it informally, and at that point I didn't know I was doing consultation. Having the communication, with chief and council, the health director. For me, it was even the healthcare providers that we were able to all work together and come up with a way. I guess we worked interdisciplinary as well, but the biggest part was coming up with something that worked for the community. And then so lastly, I just want to very quickly talk about my last endeavor before we move on, is in 2 weeks, I will be speaking with John O'Keefe, and we'll be introducing the Indigenous Dental Association of Canada that I've been working on. So basically, I'm not just going to be considering dentists, it's going to be Indigenous dental oral healthcare providers. And it's going to be a whole scope, but really what I want to do is create a community for Indigenous dental providers in Canada for us to come together and work collaboratively. And so this way we can have discussions and hopefully improve oral healthcare in Canada for Indigenous communities. And that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Mckinstry. So do we have a volunteer then for the next talk?
I'll go.
Okay, Dr. Visconti. So I will actually be reading your bio. So give me 1 second. All right, so I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Luanne Viscanti. So Dr. Visconti received her Doctorate of Dental Surgery from the Faculty of Dentistry, University of Toronto in 1988. During her time in dental school, she was involved in research projects which prepared her for postgraduate studies at the University of Manitoba, where she graduated in 1992 with her orthodontic specialty certification and Master's of Science. Dr. Visconti has presented at several meetings of the International Association of Dental Research through her academic career, and has been the first author of several peer-reviewed articles and abstracts. Following her graduation, Dr. Visconti moved to Timmins and has enjoyed a career as a solo practitioner for the past 28 years. For over the past 25 years, she has been involved with the Ontario Dental Association, serving on several advisory committees and task force. She was elected to the board of directors in 2012 and served as its president and chair of the board from 2017 to 2018. Dr. Visconti was elected and is currently serving as the Ontario Dental Association representative to the Canadian Dental Association Board from April 2020 to the present. Please welcome Dr. Luanne Viscanti.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be speaking to this group and to be in such esteemed company. As Caitlin has pointed out, I was born and raised in Toronto, and I did my undergraduate training as well as my dental degree at University of Toronto. When I graduated in 1988, I had the opportunity to do an internship at Sunnybrook Medical Center. Part of this internship, we were required to go up to a First Nations reserve to provide dental care for 3 weeks in otherwise underserviced areas. And this is where I consider that my Northern experience began. I really think walking out onto the tarmac at Pearson International to take a prop plane from Toronto to Thunder Bay, then to Sioux Lookout to stay overnight, and then on to Big Trout Lake Reserve. Again, really opened my eyes. Like most Torontonians, I thought that Northern Ontario was basically North Bay. But this experience was actually really life-changing for me on a number of levels. I certainly caught a glimpse into the customs of the people that I was treating while on Big Trout Lake Reserve. And I have to share this story. I thought it was quite humorous actually at the time. I was working in the dental clinic, my first full day in the dental clinic in the nursing station. This elderly woman came in and she said in Cree to our dental assistant that she wanted a tooth extracted. And the tooth was quite periodontally involved, but you know, we took our time with her, and the extraction went really well, and it was very easy. And then over the next week, the first week that I was there, we were doing, so many people were booking extractions. So when I asked the dental assistant about this, she said, "You don't know?" And I said, "No." She said, they were told that the dentist was a little girl from Toronto, and they wanted to make sure that she could pull teeth. So they sent the old woman in, these were her words, the old woman in as a test, and you passed. She gave you the 2 thumbs up. And that's why everybody was getting extractions. While in Big Trout Lake, I met my husband of the past 30 years, who was a commercial pilot flying for a company out of Thunder Bay, and he is from Timmins. So after completing my internship, I, like Dr. Mckinstry, am an alumnus of University of Manitoba, where I did a combined orthodontic and master's program. When I graduated from the program in 1992, though, the big question was, where do I set up my practice? And I'll tell you, quite honestly, I wasn't thinking of any other location but Toronto until the summer before I graduated. I came to Timmins and for a visit. And I was speaking with a local dentist who emphatically told me that Timmins really needed an orthodontic specialist. So at that time in 1992, when I moved to Timmins, there were no resident orthodontic specialists here. In fact, there were no resident dental specialists here for miles around. So just to give you a picture of what that looked like at that time, in 1992, out of 250 orthodontists registered to practice in Ontario, and out of 823 specialists registered to practice in Ontario, I was the only one that was setting up in Timmins area. So the area that I service is from probably about 450 square miles around. So I service from Timmins north up the James Bay coast to include several reserves as far north as Pewanuck, to Thunder Bay to the west, to Rouen, Noranda, Quebec in the east, and Sudbury and North Bay to the south. So it's quite a large area. So the fact that, yes, my husband was from Timmins, but also the fact that they didn't have, an orthodontist here certainly played a role in where my husband and I decided to call home for the past 29 years. Being the only resident specialist created a lot of opportunities for me, but it also created a lot of challenges that my colleagues in Southern Ontario working in larger urban centers do not experience. Again, as I was saying, being the only resident specialist here, I had no associateship opportunities. So I had to open my own practice right from the start. And of course, I didn't have a lot of business education or background. And when you are a practice owner, you have to be everything from CEO to HR manager to clinician. So it's very important right away that you surround yourself with knowledgeable individuals whose expertise and advice you're going to be able to rely on. It's also very important to get involved with your local component dental society. I think one of the first things that I did when I moved to Timmins back in 1992 was to contact the president of the Timmins and District Dental Society. Component societies are great. I mean, they provide practice support through resources and continuing education events. And as well, they provide mentorship opportunities and they provide camaraderie and a sense of community. So other challenges that presented themselves in setting up my practice in a rural area were in creating comprehensive treatment plans that required multidisciplinary approaches. Because a lot of the dental services were not offered around here, this necessitated that patients had to travel great distances to other cities where these services are offered. So, and there's no travel grants for these visits. So it became quite costly for people to travel, not only in terms of dollars, but also in terms of their time off of work and school. The gap in accessibility of these services certainly made it difficult for the dentists in Timmins, as well as myself, to provide the best care that we could for our patients, because it really depended on the ability of these patients to be able to travel to where these much needed services were offered. But fortunately, in the last 9 to 10 years, and with the patient's needs in mind, a couple of the larger general dental group practices have brought in specialists in other fields. They brought in endodontists, periodontists, and oral and maxillofacial surgeons on a locum basis. And this has certainly enriched the dental community in Timmins and facilitates far more effective multidisciplinary approach to treating our patients. And for patients, they get access to these services right in their own backyard. And this removes that burden that the extensive travel has, puts on them. Other challenges in a rural orthodontic practice are half my patients come from out of town. Some as far as a 5-hour train ride away. So, keeping on that tight schedule in the office is sometimes not always possible. They could be delayed in, arriving to their appointment because of weather conditions, road conditions, construction, and one time even due to a train derailment in some of my patients coming from Moosonee and Moose Factory. If something is broken or they have a brace off or they have a band off, we generally try to fix it at that appointment rather than having them come back the following week when we had more room in our schedule. Now that certainly worked a lot better during before the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, because of our strict COVID guidelines, it's not always possible to repair something at that same appointment. And sometimes they do have to come back when one of our enclosed rooms is available. In larger urban centers, if a patient has jaw surgery, the oral maxillofacial surgeon is the one that does the postoperative care. Whereas in a rural orthodontic practice, I do all the postoperative care. In larger urban centers, if you remove braces or you do a deband in the morning, you can insert the retainers at, in the afternoon because of the close proximity of the lab to the orthodontic office. But in my practice, we take the wires out, we take the impressions, we tie all the wires back in so nothing moves and everything stays straight. We send the models down to the lab in Southern Ontario. They remove the braces from the models before fabricating the retainers, and the retainers are inserted 7 to 10 days after that impression appointment. So there are a number of differences and a number of challenges. But having said that, living in Northern Ontario is definitely a lifestyle choice. It has allowed me to enjoy all the things that I love to do and all the things that the outdoors have to offer. I love downhill skiing and cross-country skiing. I love hiking, biking, golfing. I've even taken up the violin and I've been playing violin for 21 years and 10 years in the Timmins Symphony Orchestra. Getting involved in the community has always been so important to me. And I have sat on many fundraising committees and committee for projects, community projects. And I've also chaired and organized many fundraising events for different community events and things like Timmins Symphony Orchestra. But I think one of the best perks about living in Northern Ontario is that it only takes me 5 to 7 minutes to drive from my home to my office. And that's depending on the traffic, and only minutes from any of the aforementioned activities. So it really, living in Northern Ontario provides an excellent lifestyle, and it allows a great balance between practice time and family and recreational time, a lifestyle that I highly recommend. And so I would like to thank Ms. Loo for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion. And I also thank you for your kind attention this evening.
All right, thanks so much, Dr. Visconti. So do I have a volunteer to go next? Dr. Singh? Oh, Dr. McNally? Either or.
You choose.
Dr. McNally, do you want to go next since I
Sure.
know it's later for you? And,
Yes, that's right. It's
yeah, so I was thinking
we're
that
at the other end.
earlier.
Right.
Sorry,
Well, thank you so much. And I saw some familiar student names in the audience. So great to see, even though we don't see each other in person very much because of the pandemic.
Sorry, Dr. McNally. I was just going to ask, Gavin actually is on the call. And
oh,
so
yes,
I'm
right.
actually going to do your introduction.
Okay, of course. Thanks.
So I have Gavin Rattle from Dalhousie, and he will be introducing Dr. McNally.
Sure, thanks, Caitlin. So Dr. McNally is a longtime faculty dentist at Dalhousie, who is currently the Dean of Research Affairs and a professor with the Department of Dental Clinical Sciences, Preventive Dentistry, and Oral Health Promotion. Dr. McNally received her MSc, MA, and DDS all from Dalhousie University, WuDal, and her BSc at Mount St. Vincent. Her clinical and academic interests include caring for elders, oral health promotion, and healthcare ethics, focusing on social justice and access to care for vulnerable populations. On tonight's topic, Dr. McNally has completed research in children's oral health in an Indigenous community in Labrador, which I'm sure she'll tell us lots about. Dr. McNally has been SPEA Dalhousie's ACD mentor for quite some time, but I'm sad to say that Dr. McNally is stepping back from some of her roles this year, and she will be greatly missed by all the students at the faculty. So please welcome Dr. McNally.
Thank you, Gavin. you raised the fact that I'm stepping back, so it's you kind of took me off guard a little bit there. But yes, I think I guess when Dr. McKinstry was speaking, it occurred to me that I'm taking a bit of a different focus, I think, I certainly want to talk about the research that I do, and also the ethics part of it, of what I am involved with in terms of the SPEA. So I kind of had that theme in mind, because this group, of course, is the Student Professionalism and Ethics Association. So I wanted to bring in some kind of the ethical aspects of conducting research involving communities, priority communities and Indigenous communities. So it's maybe a little more academic, but I'm going to just screen share. And hopefully, this will kind of flank Dr. McKinstry's talk a little bit as well, because little does she know that her work has reached us, and a publication that we have in our resource package for our Indigenous cultural safety course. And it's a reading that I get students to read often. It's a lovely article. So just a little bit of a shout out. So it's kind of neat that, as an Indigenous person, that she has shared her experience, because as a non-Indigenous person doing research, I'm situated in a very different place, and I'm very cognizant of that. So I've sort of titled, my few PowerPoints about Indigenous communities in Atlantic Canada and doing research in a good way, and sort of recognizing my own position as a non-Indigenous person. And also want to acknowledge that Dalhousie University, and my home where I am right now, is located in the unceded territory of Mi'kma'ki. It's the traditional land of the Mi'kmaq people in Atlantic Canada. So, just to give you a little bit of a background, I know Gavin has talked a little bit about my academic career, but my context is that I've been so fortunate to have been invited to communities to engage in research in Northwest, in Iqaluit, in Northern Labrador, Nunatsiavut, Nunatuavut, and more recently in Nova Scotia, in Unama'ki, which is Cape Breton Island. And so these just represent some of the studies and research. And I sort of got my footing with the Inuit Oral Health Survey, probably more than a decade ago now, but certainly gave me lots of experience, and I guess maybe some confidence to work with communities. So the sort of, I guess, more academic messages is in doing research in a good way is, being aware of some of the damage that has been done in Indigenous communities in Canada through research, and research not having been done traditionally in a good way. And also just to talk a little bit about OCAP principles, which are principles that First Nations have adopted in Canada as kind of a standard for managing research data. So when thinking about community-based participatory research, which is really it's an imperative in doing research, especially as a non-Indigenous person coming into communities. And the way I thought I would talk about one of the models or one of the philosophies of doing research in a good way is a philosophy that comes out of Nova Scotia, developed by Elder Albert Marshall, called Two-Eyed Seeing. And I thought it would be best to actually have Elder Marshall give the message himself. So I have a short video that I just want to share that I hope you'll be able to see. Can everyone see a YouTube?
Yes, Dr. McNally, just make sure that you audio share as well.
Oh, okay. How do I do that?
So you might have to exit screen sharing first.
Okay.
And then when you go to screen share, a window will pop up, and then at the bottom left, it'll say share my audio.
Okay, so stop share.
Yep.
Okay, and then I go screen share.
Yep. And then when it shows you all the windows, you see at the bottom left, it says share my computer's audio.
Share sound, it says. So that must be it.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I wouldn't have known that. And then I pick the correct desktop and share again. Oh, uh-oh, now it's asking me for a password. I don't know if this is going to work. Okay.
I see it's very much, in my humble opinion, inherent in the Mi'kmaq way of thinking. I think it's imperative that we apply those lessons learned from our forefathers as to how do we weave back and forth in these two worlds in which we have to coexist without compromising the essence of who you are as a Mi'kmaq.
The sort of Western lens tends to be tactical and data-driven, but we know that people are a whole package of heart and soul and spirituality and beliefs. And so Two Eyes Seeing combines that in a much more holistic way.
When we look at knowledge around how we understand pain and hurt, for example, we also want to address how we want to learn about healing, what it is about pain management that we know in our own traditions that manage our own well-being.
We need to educate healthcare providers to have a better understanding of the differences in the needs of services and supports that First Nations populations need.
We have to be really focused on what are the needs, the values, the desires and goals of the individual, and that's primary. And secondary is all the things we can do. So I think, the Two-Eyed Seeing model is really about the whole human.
We're trying to bring those two perspectives together, and we've done that through different methods. So for example, we use healthcare utilization data to look at what First Nation community members seek healthcare for, and do they seek care for the same types of issues, and do they get care for the same types of issues?
And the community was taking part in that process. We're taking part in the training of clinicians, building curriculum, developing health context for understanding what it is that Aboriginal people go through when it comes to health and well-being, understanding the history behind some of the things that would have happened that help us understand who we are today even when it comes to our well-being.
That co-learning will create transformative change. And that's exactly what we need to move forward with our healthcare system and to support these children and communities to be healthy for the future.
When you invoke your Two-Eyed Seeing for the non-native person, I think it would be very, very helpful if they can just momentarily put on another lens so that as this exchange is ongoing, you will be able to then begin to train yourself as to how can I weave back and forth between these two ways of knowing.
So thank you for that. I as I said, I thought it was more poignant to bring an elder's voice than my own. But he's right. At the end, when he talks about, it gives me a place, and it gives me a place where I feel safe, because I in this model, I feel in the communities that I'm working with that my perspective is valued, but my perspective is not it doesn't trump any member of the community's knowledge either. And so really learning how to use both lenses for new forms of learning is really the way in which I think this research, the research is done in a good way. And this is a Mi'kmaqi philosophy, but it's also, it's now a philosophy that's really cited around the world. I've seen it in Australia, and our own Albert Marshall. The communities that I've been working with in Nova Scotia is Eskasoni, where he's from primarily. It's our largest it's our largest First Nations community in Canada. But as one of the researchers said on the video, we do use data to drive the research. And so one of the projects I've been involved with in Cape Breton in Unama'ki is that when they did some data analysis, they found that 42% of preventable hospital admissions in Cape Breton were because of dental conditions. And that exceeded the next, by fourfold. And so we were invited into the community to examine this phenomenon and try to understand it. And so, again, felt very privileged to be invited into the community and worked with the researchers that were on the video. They are head up the it's called AIC, the Aboriginal Children's Hurt and Healing Initiative. And they're again national leaders in childhood pain. And of course, what's one of the biggest causes of childhood pain is dental pain. So this is how we've kind of all come together in this initiative. So we've been working away in this research in recent years, trying to understand this phenomenon and what is causing so many preventable hospital admissions. And what that means is that these visits should be, or these conditions should be able to be managed in primary care in the community. They should not be initiatives that require hospital care. So this is just this next step is just to show you Cape Breton and the 5 communities that comprise the 5 First Nation communities in Unama'ki. And then, our research objectives were to actually take a deeper dive into the data, but also to ask the community, caregivers in the community, health providers in the community, what's going on here? Why is this happening? And so, have collected data over some time, but this is where I come back to the notion of OCAP principles. And so the data, the information from the research is actually, it's very important that the community leads the dissemination of those findings. And part of it is to be so that the narrative goes with it in the right way, which is part of doing research in a good way. And what I mean by that is, there may be findings that would seem stigmatizing to the community. And so it's important that the narrative goes with that. So quick example might be, there are a couple of hospital communities nearby where waiting lists are really short in one community, but waiting lists are long in the other community, and everyone's still lining up at the community that's the longer waiting list, so care isn't taking place. And so that could be looked at, well, why aren't these parents just getting the kids to where they can, get the care quicker? Well, one of the reasons is First Nations Inuit Health funding for transportation only covers a certain number of kilometers, and so they have to go to the community that's closer. And so something that would be, an extra 20 kilometers, or in this case, maybe 40, 50 kilometers, makes the difference of a child lining up for specialist care in a different way. So it's really important that the data be accompanied with this kind of context that goes along with the research findings. So I can't share the findings with you because I don't have permission from the community to do that. I do have permission to just talk about some high-level things and just noting how there's lots of care going on, we've discovered, through direct providers, dentists, dental hygienists, denturists, through FNIB, through COHI, through dental therapy and community wellness and the hospitals, but they're not talking to each other. And so we end up with these gaps in care. So, at a high level, that's one of the phenomena. And I'll just sort of end off with, Gavin had mentioned that some of our work in Labrador that I'd be speaking to. And one of the things, as a researcher, I have to bear in mind that oral health may not be a priority, even though I'm, as the outsider, thinking, that 42%, we've got to do something about that. But this is just a photo of a trip to Northern Labrador. When we got to the community, as researchers, the power had been out in the community for almost 2 days. And so there's my colleague and I with our headlamps trying to find our rooms in our lodge that we were staying in. And I have a picture here of my toothbrush and toothpaste with a can of 7-Up, because the community didn't have potable water. They had a boil water order and there was no power. So the community had essentially run out of water to purchase. So this is just an example of this community had a lot to deal with at the minute. And so just an example of how we sometimes have to step back and be led by the community. So I'll just end there, and just a little highlight of some of the things we're doing. And thank you, and LouAnn.
Thank you, Dr. McNally. So maybe I'll have Serena come back, please. All right, so I'll have Serena introduce Dr. Singh next.
All right, so Dr. Singh is an assistant professor, dental public health, and director of inclusive community outreach at the University of Saskatchewan's College of Dentistry. He joined USAS after working for 4 years in Northern Saskatchewan in different capacities as director of primary healthcare within Saskatchewan's Health Authority and the regional intersectoral coordinator with Northern Human Services Partnership. Dr. Singh completed his Bachelor of Dental Surgery at the Sri Guru Ramdas Institute of Dental Sciences and Research in India, and practiced as a dentist before completing his Master of Public Health from University of Saskatchewan in 2015. With extensive experience working with Northern Saskatchewan communities, Dr. Singh's role at University of Saskatchewan is to explore opportunities for innovation to extend service and care to priority populations outside of cities. This includes overseeing the 6 outreach clinics that the College of Dentistry is currently operating across Northern Saskatchewan, as well as establishing relationships and working with different communities and contributors to continue to expand this network of dental clinics that provide care to priority populations across the province. Dr. Singh has spent his career developing and executing a comprehensive, integrated, and community-based holistic health model. His research interests include Canadian Indigenous oral health, access to oral health care services in Canada, spirituality and health, oral health and nutrition, patient and family-centered care, and holistic approaches to oral health. Please welcome Dr. Singh.
Thank you, Serena, and thank you, Caitlin. It is an extreme pleasure to be here today amid all of you, and I am looking forward to sharing my experiences about myself and to learn from one another. Before I proceed further, I would like to share my PowerPoint, so bear with me here. Are you all able to see a PowerPoint presentation? Perfect. Thank you. So I'd begin with the land acknowledgement. Well, I am currently in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of Métis. And as we gather here today, we pay our respect to First Nations and Métis ancestors and reaffirm our relationship with one another. Serena introduced me really well. It was a lengthy introduction. I wasn't sure what parts of it are going to be discussed and used, so thank you for that. Before I start to talk a little bit about my role and what I do in Saskatchewan and at the College of Dentistry here at university, I would like to speak a little bit about my positionality, and I think it is important to do so. I was born and raised in Northern India, and I'm an immigrant Canadian first generation here. My family lives in Calgary, and my immediate family includes my mother and 2 siblings. I also have 2 nephews and a niece, and those little guys, I'm proud to share, are my inspiration every day. They teach me the value of relationships and the love we carry for one another. So I'm extremely proud to share about that. But then what I do as my service, you all are aware at this point that I teach at the university. I do the research, and I also am the director of Inclusive Community Outreach Program, which I will share with you just in a bit. Prior to starting this role at the university, which was 2 years ago now, I worked in Northern Saskatchewan, and I would like to share how that journey started and how it shaped everything for me. When I took my Master of Public Health program at University of Saskatchewan, that was the first time when I learned in detail about the health inequities that exist and health disparities that are there, especially related to the Indigenous populations. And it was an eye-opener, and it was that opportunity for me to go and serve where the need is. And that is when, after graduating, I started applying actively for jobs in Northern Saskatchewan. I was fortunate enough to secure a position with Ministry of Education at that point, to work as a regional intersectoral coordinator, and I worked on early childhood development on those initiatives in that role. But I always had oral health as my focus as well, given my background. So my first meaningful project that I think of was leading an oral health and nutrition tour in 10 northern communities. And it was preventative and educational in focus, but many meaningful messages came out of that tour. And then opportunities came open, and I had the opportunity to serve as Director of Primary Healthcare and Population Health Services in northwest part of the province, and that comprises 1/4 of total geographical area of Saskatchewan. And under that portfolio, I also managed the provincial children's dental program, the Enhanced Preventative Dental Services program. So having lived in Northern Saskatchewan for 4 years, I made the community of Buffalo Narrows as my home. It gave me firsthand experience of what it is like to be situated 5 hours away from a major city, and what type of services are available, and if my basic needs were met or not. So that experience overall shaped everything that followed in my life. That experience definitely brought a lot of opportunities for my growth as a person, as a professional. And it had some unique challenges as well, and that lived experience then shaped what I did after that role or within that role. And now at the University of Saskatchewan, the goal of my portfolio is redefining dental care from an Indigenous perspective. So we are actively working here, establishing community partnerships with First Nations and Métis leadership to discover oral healthcare solutions based on Indigenous ways of knowing. And also aim to conducting community engaged research to learn how we can best provide services that are respectful, inclusive, and culturally appropriate. So I'm going to touch on a little bit about service component that I'm part of here within the Inclusive Community Care portfolio. So in the last 2 years, the College of Dentistry has implemented dental services in 7 priority communities. And this is a result of collaboration and participation with the health authority here, private businesses, and even and First Nations leadership, which is at most important. So my goal always when we establish these clinics is to demonstrate a true partnership with the communities where the services are going to be delivered. And as I have listed here, the 7 clinics that are currently in place in Saskatchewan through these partnerships, they are in different areas of the province. So from Northeast, rural, Northeast, Northwest, remote, and then we have 2 clinics here in Saskatoon core neighborhood, and another cities, Prince Albert, in that core neighborhood, we have another clinic. And 2 of these clinics that you're seeing at the bottom rows there, Saskatoon and Prince Albert, this is where our 3rd and 4th year DMD students also go, and they have some service learning opportunities so as to better prepare them to serve the communities, the underserved populations in the best way possible. And so I guess the goal of my portfolio here is, and through opening these clinics, is increasing access to oral health care and developing a program that builds on existing health services in the area. It is all about working with the community to first understand what the needs are, and then designing the service or bringing the service based on those needs. And eventually with the goal that there is local leadership and involvement in running and in operating those clinics. So there are always opportunities to combine the preventative and treatment program. Nature of this work is also very interdisciplinary and taking into consideration the social determinants of health. And I guess the ultimate goal is to develop a model of care that is culturally appropriate and holistic in nature. Because when I start to talk about the access to care challenges, it does not end with the availability of services or not. Access is a complex issue, and oftentimes it is about the identification of need. So it occurs in phases and steps, and the readiness. And then once person is in the dental clinic or accessing a medical service, what type of service was provided, that determined the relationship with the provider. So I guess very mindful of all the steps, and to establish the services that are truly based on that mutual participation model between the patient and the provider, and that services are delivered in a culturally appropriate manner wherever these clinics are located. And now I will stop sharing my screen here.
All right, thank you, Dr. Singh. And lastly, we have Dr. Ciriani. So I'm going to ask Amy Kim from UBC to give the introduction. Go ahead, Amy. Thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy. I'm a 3rd year student at UBC here, and I'm happy to be joining in on still a cozy 5 in the afternoon over in the West. So I'll be introducing Dr. David Ciriani. Graduating from UBC Dental School in 1987, Dr. David Ciriani bought a practice in Smithers, BC, a town of about 5,000 people in the northwest of BC. With no specialist support in the region, this required that Dr. Ciriani quickly became competent in all areas of dentistry. Also, with a large First Nations population, Dr. Ciriani became acquainted with the challenges faced by these people, both dentally and socially. In 2000, Dr. Ciriani moved back to his hometown of Kamloops, BC, a population of about 100,000, where Dr. Ciriani still practices. In Kamloops, Dr. Ciriani became involved in the Children's Oral Health Initiative, in which he did dental screenings at local First Nations elementary schools. This led him to help establish dental clinics on the Kamloops and Squaw Lakes reserves, which his associates and he have staffed. And through organized dentistry, Dr. Ciriani has been involved with Indigenous issues as a member of the BCDA Access to Care Committee, the CDA Access to Care Committee, and the CDA NIHB Technical Working Group. Dr. Ciriani has also served as a clinical consultant to the FNHA dental therapist. Dr. Ciriani has served the profession in a number of capacities, including serving as president of the Northwest BC Dental Society, the Thompson Okanagan Dental Society, and the BC Dental Association. Dr. Ciriani is currently president of the Kamloops and District Dental Society. Please welcome Dr. David Ciriani.
Thank you very much, Amy. Am I coming through clear there? It sounds good. Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone. And I'm now wishing I'd taken the first spot because it's quite the hard acts to follow. Wonderful presentations by everyone. And I mean, so much of what I've heard, you know, I could repeat. So I'm as you're speaking, I'm revamping my talk because I don't want to be too repetitive. I guess my different approach to this, I'm a boots on the ground dentist, general dentist. And let me start out, as Amy said, I was naive enough to come out of dental school and buy a practice in northern BC. Just for pretty pictures and some geographic content. I'll see if I can share my screen here. Can you see that?
Yes, Dr. Ciriani.
So thank you. So as Amy mentioned, graduating in '87, I went to a talk and they were saying, you know, like Dr. Visconti said, I planned on being in southern BC like she planned on being around Toronto. But hearing the need in the northern part of the province and not wanting to sit around and play cards in the office and really wanting to put to use all the dental knowledge I just learned, I went for a drive after final exams and I stopped in all the communities in northern BC or the northwest BC that were looking for someone, and no one was looking for associates. They just wanted to sell practices. And being naive enough, I bought one. And so had to learn all the ins and outs of running a practice, as well as putting in place all my knowledge and treating patients. As I mentioned, this was without any sort of specialist support at all. And the closest specialist we had was 2 hours away was an orthodontist 2 hours away in Terrace. So the community is looking towards you, and you rapidly realize that you're the doctor. And so it was a great learning experience. And I've encouraged students over the years to really consider going out to more remote or rural communities as a way of increasing their knowledge. Especially now, from what I hear from students, people are encouraged to refer because of the medical legal issues. But, you know, I always look back on one of my cases where it was a patient, they had a lesion on a 1-2, failed root canal. And I said, gee, you know, we're going to have to send you to Vancouver for this because that's the closest endodontist. And the patient said, you know what? It's going to cost me a flight, the treatment, the hotel, time off work. He goes like, and I don't know this doctor, but I know you and I trust you. I said, well, I've never done this procedure before. I've just read about it. And he said, well, let's give it our best shot. So that we went ahead. I did a lot of studying beforehand, and I did my first apicoectomy and retrofill that way, which was great for my self-confidence. It was successful. Patient did well, and there were so many things that I may not have done if I hadn't gone out to a more remote location. The other thing was I was shocked by the need of First Nations communities. You know, what we'd heard, they had a dental plan, thought they'd be well taken care of. What I found when I got there was the degree of caries that we were taught in school was sort of historical. You're never going to see these bombed out mouths was an everyday experience. And I also learned that the NIHB, or DIA plan, as it was called in those days, was far below the standards we'd expect from other dental plans. And that really, I hate to say inspired, but it really drove me to try and improve the treatment for my First Nations. In Smithers, I forgot to mention, the closest nation to us was the Wet'suwet'en, and close by was the Gitxsan. But in that area, we drew from a large area. As I mentioned, Smithers was a town of about 5,000, but we had a drawing area of about 25,000. So we also saw members of the Haida, Tahltan nations as well. And so that really inspired me to try and improve that. I mean, and over the years, we have seen a big improvement in that. And that's, you know, I served on the NIHB CDA technical working group. What we did there was to try and improve the NIHB plan. And I'm happy to say it's far improved. When I started, we couldn't do root canals on First Nation teeth. It was like, if there was a pathology, we had to extract the tooth. I think this is something I'm having trouble in this talking because there's so much information, and it's all sort of historical now. But one of the things about being culturally sensitive with First Nations is what the NIHB plan, it created a culture of substandard dentistry where the expectation for First Nations people was less than the regular population. They expected to have teeth extracted rather than repaired. And this is sort of slowly in the new generations is being worked out of the system, but that's something to be very aware of and not be judgmental about because someone is missing a lot of teeth. A lot of times it wasn't their choice. Just to share pretty pictures. So Smithers, that's Main Street Smithers, nice small town. Now, as I said, in 2000, I made the transition to Kamloops, which is in the Secwepemc First Nations territory. And that's where I grew up. This is Kamloops, much bigger than Smithers. Now, I'm going to see if I can, I'll go back here to Caitlin, how do you put sharing your screen? Oh, there we go. You push that button. So going the, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So I think for those of you who are looking at First Nations and working with First Nations or working in a rural community, I think the key words that stand out for me is community. And First Nations are wonderful at talking about community. But when you practice in a rural area, rural areas are about community. And it's being part of the community and not bringing in you know, those of us who've gone through university, we're submerged in that academic environment. We talk the academic language. We go out to small towns. That is not the language. There's realities that a lot of us haven't faced before. And I think if you're going to practice in small towns and with Indigenous communities, you have to be part of the community. And it is so rewarding to be part of the community. And, you know, I could tell you a pile of stories and I wish I could, but we don't have that much time. But as we go along, one of the things that was mentioned is I'm involved with the Children's Oral Health Initiative. I was approached to join that in the Kamloops area to go into First Nations schools and do screening on children that are in kindergarten through grade 3. And what I really liked about that program was the fact that we had Kohai aides. Kohai aides are members of the First Nations community who are trained in the dental education area and public health, so that instead of another white person coming in and telling a First Nations community what they should be doing for better oral health, they had a person who's part of their community who's communicating that. And my role was an adjunct to help them. And that program, you know, in the publications, it's sort of up and down in popularity, but I think at its core, it's a really great program. And I think I'm very proud to be part of that. And that led me into the other thing you see across First Nations community is the federal government, in its great wisdom, built health centers. And in a lot of them, they put in dental suites, which sit unmanned and unequipped. And so we had 2 in our region, which I talked to the local health directors and we managed to get them up and working. Now, this seems in Kamloops to be like a little bit redundant, but I think it brings into a good point. The Kamloops Indian Band Reserve is basically across the river from downtown Kamloops. However, there's no bus service and there's no access for First Nations people to get to dental practices that are just across the river, unless they have their car. But in a lot of First Nations communities, poverty is a very real thing, and you may not be able to get a ride. The other thing is First Nations experiences with dentistry and the establishment and healthcare isn't very good. So to have a clinic on the reserve is very comforting for them. And I would say very rewarding for me when I was there, because for the first while, a lot of what we did was just sit and talk and listen, because there were so many things that happened in residential schools that I was unaware of. Fellow my own age was in the residential school across town. I thought, as we'd say in those days, the Indian kids in the residential school had it great because they had a swimming pool at their school. We had no idea what was going on there. It's, you know, it's now that we start to learn these things. I mean, he told me how they were taken on a tour in a bus on a field trip to downtown to see how their parents were drinking at the bar, and told that their parents were celebrating not having their children. And he shared how their parents were, sorry, I get choked up with this one. The parents were drinking because they were mourning the loss of their children. And I think there's so many scars in the community that have been left over from the residential school system that we in the rest of the Canadian society were so unaware of. So it is very important that we try and help with this reconciliation and be very cognizant of the values that have fallen down through that. But as I say, being part of a community and being accepted as part of the Indigenous community, as some of the speakers have said before, is very rewarding. And it's, I'm very proud of being part of that community, even though I'm a white guy. I guess the things that I would say about rural practice is, and a lot of people would be shocked by this, but rural practice is about diversity. It's about diversity in the people you see. If you're in a small town, you see all socioeconomic groups. You see all people from all walks of life. You see people from the Indigenous community. You see people from the immigrant community. You see people from the established Canadian community. You also, excuse me, you're also doing a diversity of procedures, whereas in the city, you may be referring out your endo. You might be doing this because you're afraid because of inexperience. But as you develop your skills in a small town, there's more procedures that you can do, and it's very enjoyable to be able to have that skill set. So, both professionally and personally, it's great. And as Dr. Visconti said, if you love the outdoors, there's such a vast variety of things you can do. If you're looking to be in the latest fashion trends of and being able to shop every day, and you have to be at Starbucks, well, you might not like it so much, but there's so many other things you can try that are amazing, and it's worth the introduction. I guess my final note I'd like to say about being in a small town is collegiality. And that goes back to this whole program through SPEA. Is, I think those old timers of us really see this being harder and harder as there's more and more competition. And I can say definitely in the Northwest Dental Society, we were our own support network. There was, in all of Northwest BC, when I was there was 26 dentists in the most vast area of BC. And so you look to each other for support. And that is how I ended up in organized dentistry, because it's like your turn to represent us. And so those things are all very important. And that really part of my experience was being part of organized dentistry has been very rewarding. And that kept going. And now in Kamloops, I'm very proud of our local dental society because it is a bigger city, there is more competition, but we've managed to keep a spirit of collegiality, which I think is so important in the profession. And for us to really call ourselves professionals rather than salespeople, it's important to support each other and not think of our colleagues as competitors, but being colleagues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Ciriani, and thank you to all our panelists. So we actually have some questions that have been submitted. If you would like to submit a question for our panel, either for the entire panel or for a specific person, please feel free to use the form in the chat or send it directly in the chat if you would like. So we'll just get started. And panelists, feel free to chime in. You don't have to all answer every question, but maybe one or two of you if you want to chime in on the question. So first question we have is, what is a common misconception about working in rural and Indigenous communities as a dental provider?
Could I?
Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Ciriani.
Well, one of the things you have, sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
One of the things that I had to deal with when I first started was my classmates when I moved to Northwest BC was just the prejudice that I didn't realize was there. It's like I was asked, why would you go up there? There's just Indians. there's a lot of that, and you know, your lifestyle is going to be terrible up there. Just like, sure, you're going to be busy, but you know, so there's a lot of judgmentalism. Now, I think our world is much kinder than that now, but there's certainly, it's not gone from our system. Oh, the one other thing is that I heard a lot was, like, how can you go to a small town? Everybody's going to be talking about you and you'll have no privacy because everybody knows everybody's business. Just like, well, I'm really not doing anything that I care if people know. It's like, I'm not trying to hide too much. But again, goes back to what I was saying. People want to know what you're doing because you're part of the community and they care. And so rather than looking at it as a negative thing, as long as you're a good member of the community, people care about you.
Okay, perfect.
Can I add something, Caitlin?
Yeah, sure, for sure.
Thank you. So from my experience, when I made that decision to go live and work in the northern Saskatchewan, my fellow classmates thought that, you know, it perhaps not a good idea because I'm not aware of the community. I'm not aware of what to expect. But I guess I was committed. I had a goal in mind. And I was not scared to ask questions. And I knew as an outsider, as a newcomer to Canada, new to the province, only about 3 years in living in Saskatoon, and then that decision to go work in northern Saskatchewan, I had lots of those questions and those misconceptions, but I guess from my experience, then it all proved to be opposite. I found the communities to be very accepting, very friendly. I was encouraged to ask questions about the culture, about the language. And there were instances where in some communities, English was not the first language, but we found ways to communicate through a translator, through a community member who I knew the other language as well. So there were definitely those ways explored and led to a very positive experience.
Thank you. So if someone is interested in seeing how they can be of service to Indigenous populations through dentistry, perhaps through extended work on a reserve or even more locally, where would you recommend that they start?
I guess I could just speak for locally here. There would certainly be some connections to be made, kind of word of mouth. You know, I could introduce people to someone that I know, but there are also friendship center, there's an urban friendship center, Mi'kmaq Friendship Center. That would be a good place to start. So I think there are lots of sort of community resources like that. And then there's the programming that's sponsored by First Nations Inuit Health, where they, you know, there's actually, you know, programs for doing locums in more remote communities that are available.
In Ontario, if I can chime in, the Ontario Dental Association, under an agreement with Health Canada, has a remote areas program. And they recruit licensed dentists and dental assistants to provide services, you know, ranging from diagnostic to restorative to fixed and removable prosthetics. It's mainly in Western Ontario. They were looking like in the Sioux Lookout and Sioux Lookout territories, but you know, they haven't been able to break into the northeastern Ontario. That's another, it's Winnebago Health Authority. And, you know, it's funny because you asked me to speak about, you know, a rural orthodontic practice and some of the challenges there. I could certainly, you know, give some information about treating Indigenous populations, because about 40% of my orthodontic practice is treating individuals from these, largely from Northeastern Ontario. And when I was president of the Ontario Dental Association, I had actually written an article, Indigenous Health Barriers to Accessing Oral Health Care. Some of the social determinants were already spoken about tonight, lack of potable water and things like that. The big things that I found were dealing with suicides. Oral health really is, I know this is getting off the topic, but I just wanted to get this in there. Oral health to these populations, while we see it as a priority, and I think Dr. McNally, you were talking about this, it's not a priority for them. They just want, their families just want to keep their children alive and safe, and having access to adequate housing, basic education, health and social services, potable water, those are priorities. So there's so many, factors that, really come into play here. But getting back to the original question, remote areas program, Ontario Dental Association, they have a lot of interest, and a lot of people, do like to go up and, be part of this program.
And Caitlin, I can just add for Manitoba, Dr. McNally already covered on it, but my experience is contracting with the federal government. And so contacting FNIHB for their annual bids, that's one way. And then here in Saskatchewan, you can always contact Amrinderbir and he can set you up with connections in the communities.
Perfect. All right. A lot of you touched, oh, yep, Dr. Ciriani.
If I could add, because BC is a little bit different. Back 2014, I believe, there was a tripartite agreement signed where BC First Nations took over their own healthcare programs. So there's FNHA, the First Nations Health Authority in BC, who've taken over all of that. So if anyone in BC is interested, the First Nations Health Authority is who to contact. And Dr. David Ciriani is the director there. They are still working at getting their dental programs set up in more remote communities, but he would be a great contact there if anyone's looking at some of those possibilities. Other than that, it's just looking at associateships or practices in small towns where there are larger First Nations populations.
Yep, Dr.
Caitlin, just quickly adding, for Saskatchewan specifically, there are also job postings out there on even the national job boards. And I'm constantly hiring for the clinical dentists for these outreach clinics. And I guess more and more these national job boards I'm seeing are being used for the opportunities. So definitely a good place to look at.
Perfect. Thank you all. That covers actually all the regions who are in attendance today, so that's great. Thanks. So what do you think can be done at dental schools to promote the needs and interests of Indigenous populations of Canada?
So I can speak on that one very quickly. One of the main objectives and what lured me to the University of Saskatchewan was not only the dean, but the dean's commitment that he has to indigenization of the College of Dentistry. And so I'm chairing the indigenization working group here. And what we're doing is kind of, we're confronting the institution in such a way that we're changing the processes. And in that process, we're hoping to have our providers come out with a better understanding of Indigenous history and working toward providing care for that unique population in a really good way.
Did anybody else want to jump in there? Or yep, Dr. Singh.
I guess also in relation to the indigenization overall with the dental education, I think important component is also off-service learning. So if students get an opportunity to go onto these clinics that serve underserved populations and learn more about culturally appropriate ways of service delivery, focusing on, focusing on delivering care based on the needs of the population. I guess keeping the patient at the center would be a good way to do it.
Yep, Dr. Ciriani.
Yeah, and I think one point I've made before is that really, again, this goes back to the ethics of this group, is that in treating Indigenous communities is no different than treating any community. And I think what you have to keep in mind is not to be any specific culture, but to realize that everyone has a choice and that our job is to give the best of our knowledge to individuals so that they can make a decision on their healthcare based on their experience and their needs. And we can't be judgmental on their needs. We can just help them reach what is a good place for them, but not to dictate. And I think that's particularly true for First Nations, who've been dictated to for so long, that just being told that this is what's going to happen to you. We have to take the time to stop and listen and help them get to where they want to be. But I think that's true for all of our patients.
Okay, great. So for anyone who originally grew up in an urban area, how was the transition of living in a rural area? And how did you cope with feeling isolated? And how did you maintain a good mental health?
I can take that one. I grew up in Toronto and moved to Timmins. You know what? I'm going to be honest. I didn't find the transition as, I'm going to say, drastic as it could have been, only because I think I was so busy setting up my practice and so busy. It's just almost overwhelming at first. Again, no real business background, and you have to set it up and not only that, it's hard to find mentorship. How do you say, I've got a really difficult orthodontic case. What do I do with this? I used to actually pack everything up with my differential diagnosis and all typed out my different treatment options and send them to one of my instructors at University of Manitoba if I had a really tough case. I mean, some of them were cleft lip and palate. That's the other thing. I mean, when you're in Toronto, the cleft lip and palate and syndrome cases go to Hospital for Sick Children. Up here, similar to what Dr. Ciriani was talking about, I'm treating them. So I think that had a lot to do with it, because you're just really busy getting getting your practice up and running. But also, I think community involvement really helped, and really investing in the community, showing that you're part of the community, because you live and work with these people that you're treating, and you're treating their children. And the other thing was getting involved in organized dentistry. I was involved in organized dentistry, I think 2 years after I graduated, 2 years after I moved here, and was on advisory committees for the Ontario Dental Association up until 2012, and ended up on the board. And if you hang around long enough, they say, hey, why don't you run for vice president? And then you become president. Not quite that easy, and now I find myself on the Canadian Dental Association board. So a lot of that pre-COVID, you're getting together, you're going to meetings, you're meeting students. As president, I met the Student Federation, had their first conference that year in January 2018. So, those were ways of dealing with it. And of course, physical activity, love the outdoors and all the activities that I was talking about. So it really is a nice lifestyle. But again, it can be very isolating. It could have been very easy for myself as a new practice owner just to, have my day-to-day practice and, not get involved. But I think that getting involved in organized dentistry was helped me grow professionally and personally.
Dr. McNally, you wanted to talk as well? No? Okay, Dr. Singh, you raised your hand. Did you want to speak?
Yes, thanks, Caitlin. Lots of what Dr. Visconti said holds true for me as well. The transition, in all honesty and practical terms, was not as easy in the beginning, but the community helped. The community, I was encouraged to participate in the community events. I was, at times I felt I'm the only outsider, but I was not made to feel that way. So the community events and the outdoors, the connection with the nature, that was a huge part to overcome that isolation. I'm proud to say I learned cross-country skiing, and we used the forest trails to ski and bike, and that was incredible. That's the experience that I still carry with myself now in urban lifestyle. I have this year, I have explored the ski trails in Saskatoon. So lots of positive things. I cannot just stop emphasizing how important that experience was for my personal development. But also there are some practices in communities. For example, all of my colleagues or some community members all also drove to urban centers once every month, for example. We carpooled, we purchased each other's groceries. We did all the practical things to support one another, and I thought that was incredible.
All right, so this question is about research. So what opportunities are there to contribute to dental research in Indigenous populations? And what are some of the important areas of research underway at the moment or in the near future?
That one probably has my name on it. I guess engaging with someone with experience is probably a good place to start, because it's very important to, I guess I would say, be invited and to create, trusting relationships. So find maybe a mentor who has relationships with the communities. Of course, there are high rates of dental disease. The Inuit Oral Health Survey, First Nations Oral Health Survey tell us that it's exponentially higher in Indigenous communities, oral disease. So we know there are issues to be researched and addressed. But I think always maintaining that community-based participatory approach to the extent that you can, and being patient with the time it takes to develop the relationships, right? Especially if you're coming from a university center. It's one thing if you're in the community, working in the community as some of the other panelists are, but to have that kind of introduction, the trust, I mean, it's really, really so rewarding when you are welcomed into the community, and it does take a big investment, but it's totally worth it.
Sorry, could I just add something to that?
Yeah.
Back in 2017, I'm just thinking about the research part of it. The Auditor General of Canada performed an audit on on Health Canada, on their programs to say, are you making a difference? Because if you're making a difference and you have all these things like COHI and NIHB, how come the disease rates in these Indigenous populations are at least double that of non-Indigenous? So they did an audit, and actually the report, the long and short of it was, there was no strategic plan, which would help, if you have a strategic plan, it would at least, identify gaps where needs need to be met. There was no analytics or form of measurement. I guess Health Canada thought, we're spending $200 million a year on healthcare. It's being provided. It must make a difference, when in fact it wasn't. Yeah. So I think that there has to be some research done on
evaluation.
Evaluation and how to move forward. What should we shift the measurement of success, let's say, to treatment outcomes? Versus how much money is spent and what procedures are given. Yeah. So, And to your point, the motto back, at least when I was, president of the Ontario Dental Association, was nothing for us without us. So, First Nation leaders and Inuit leaders want to be equal healthcare partners. They want to be involved in these solutions.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is very true,
And to one of David's earlier points, we, as part of our Dwegan project, we did a systematic review of literature on what are some of the best interventions in, kind of that community-based approach. And the elements of COHI are there. The elements of COHI actually are what the literature tells us are the best approaches, using community providers, training lay providers, people who are trusted in the community, and getting to that really very basic prevention, at a very young age. That's what works. And that gap, I think I showed my little Venn diagram about the gaps between, what our province thinks, oh no, for First Nation Inuit health covers that, but the hospitals are doing it. And so those gaps really need to be explored. So the program evaluation piece, that's the responsibility of Indigenous services through those programs. I think is absolutely essential. Yeah.
And then I can quickly add on that one as well, is when I get to a new institution, so I was at the University of Manitoba, as soon as I got there, I reestablished myself back there, having going back, is I always search for community, and I always search for Indigenous community. And every university center is going to have an Indigenous community present. And I did the same thing, came here to the University of Saskatchewan. I established my Indigenous community of research here as well. So one of the groups that I did find here also is part of the NEAR, so the Network Environments for Indigenous Health Research National Collaborating Center. And so here in Saskatchewan, it's the First Nations and Métis Health and Wellness Research Training and Knowledge Mobilization Network. So I'm a part of that group, and it's a wonderful group to be a part of, because you have your senior researchers coming in as a junior researcher, and you have that built-in mentorship available. So my advice is search the community, first search for the Indigenous community in the institutions. You will find them. Another point I just wanted to very quickly make about Indigenous research as well is make sure that the community wants the research and needs the research. So having that partnership and reaching out, because sometimes you have a really good idea, doesn't necessarily mean that the community thinks it's a good idea or even thinks that they need it. So it's very important to have the conversations with the communities as well.
I think it's almost you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that if you go in with, here's what we're doing, here's my thought, they're gonna just shut you down. You have to go in with this, like a blank page, and let's work together.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And even better if you're invited.
Well, you have to be invited, or
yeah.
But there is another term that they use in the past for Indigenous research, is there was a term that said, we feel like we've been researched to death, and there is a reason for that. And so having the meaningful conversation with the communities is so important, and establishing that relationship, the trust and the reciprocity that will come along with it as well.
Mm-hmm. And just to add, for any of the students that are still on from Dalhousie, we actually have a NEAR as well at Dalhousie. That's the Atlantic region, and the office currently is sitting right in the Faculty of Dentistry, right off our lobby. So it's moving, but it's still going to be connected to us. So very accessible for any of our students who are interested.
Oh, cool! That's great. Awesome.
Melanie.
I have some questions about working in a rural area. So, if you were working in there, how do you navigate your own learning? Are there any resources that are available? Do you feel that you would get more experience working in a rural area versus an urban area? And how do you deal with cases that you might not be, as comfortable with if you have to refer out?
So I had certainly touched on some of that, some of the things that I did. And now we have internet. It would have been, and we have secure portals. It would have been so much easier. CDA Secure Send, I could have just sent, you know, these records to my mentor at University of Manitoba. There's lots of courses. If you're talking about CE, like continuing education, there's so much online. And during this pandemic, I think going forward, there's going to be even more offerings online because, you know, it's, again, you're right in asking this question. Before COVID, and when I first started out, for me to get my CE, I had to take a couple of days off work, close the office down, and take, you know, an airplane ride down to Toronto or wherever the meeting was. So it is costly, and there, you know, I will say that I did serve on our executive for the Timmins and District Dental Society for over 18 years. And I actually, for several of those years, I was the CE coordinator. So I would actually bring people up here to do, you know, give us a course and, you know, a couple times a year. But now it's so much easier than when I first started out because everything is online. So, you know, there's not a problem there. Mentorship, it's funny that I'm on, as a CDA board member, Canadian Dental Association board member, I am on the Lifelong Learning Task Force. And one of the things we're looking at is mentorship, developing, you know, or supporting, I'm going to say supporting mentorship opportunities, which can come in many different forms. And that's another form of learning, especially when you're first out, you know, to try and figure out something, even matchmaking online, where people in one province, if they want to talk to someone in another, a mentor in another province, to you know, hook up with them and speak to them and ask them questions. So the world is becoming a lot smaller place, and we're trying to think of ways to connect new grads and new dentists, you know, with someone that's been in practice for a long time and can provide mentorship to you. Oh, one more thing, component societies. I did mention that in my talk. If you are in Ontario, I'm sure they have them in every province. Wherever you decide to settle and, you know, set up your practice, then whether you're an associate or an owner, definitely look up the local dental society as well.
And then I can add one more component. So in addition to the Indigenous Dental Association of Canada that I'm starting up and will be launched sometime soon, I have my website up. With respect to Indigenous oral health conversations, I actually, part of offshoot of that, I set up a Facebook group as well. It's called Indigenous Oral Health in Canada. And so that's for everyone. It's so that we can have nice conversations and create a network and availability, what people are doing, stuff like that. In addition to that, I will have the Facebook group specifically for Indigenous oral health providers though. But the one that is for everybody is Indigenous Oral Health in Canada. So that is available on Facebook.
All right, and Dr. Ciriani, yep.
Yeah, I think I'm good. No, I also wanted to reiterate what Dr. Visconti said. You know, now it is so much easier because of videos. I told the story earlier about that first apicoectomy I did. I poured over textbooks. When I tell that story to students now, they're going, "You didn't even have videos." And so, you know, it's much easier now. I know my associates are in touch with their classmates from Ontario all the time. In the course of a day, they're sharing pictures of their treatment. So I don't think professionally you're isolated. And then the other thing is definitely look up your component society. When all of this COVID is over, getting together with your colleagues is so important. And I think all the component societies, I know in Northwest, because we were so removed, we made sure that we brought in enough continuing education into the communities that everyone could get their CE credits covered just staying locally and without having to go outside. And those just the connections you get with that, as well as the education, is so important.
Okay, and so we're getting close to 10 p.m. Maritime time, so we do want to end off soon. Sorry, my apologies to the people in the Maritimes. But I just wanted to ask if everyone could just give their last words of wisdom or one piece of advice that they want to share with the students.
I just want to thank you for inviting me. I found this to be fantastically interesting, and I'm so impressed with the number of students who've joined and stayed. So I think you can contact me. I'm sure any of the panelists would be. I don't want to speak for anybody, but I'm sure this group seems like very willing support group. So yeah, anything follow up, please don't hesitate. And thanks so much for the invite. I am going to beg off though.
So I can add something. So my closing would be, as an Indigenous woman, First Nations woman, one of the things that I would recommend for sure is, to participate in reconciliation, learn about the history of Canada, learn about your territory that you're on, learn the hardships that we've been through, and respect those hardships.
Anyone else?
Sorry, I guess I'll go next. I didn't know whether to. I just think that, I'd like to, it would be wonderful if we could have done this in person, but obviously, circumstances dictate that we couldn't. But I think that whatever you do, just remember, you want to treat everyone with the dignity and respect that they deserve. And I will say, there is a saying, people don't always remember what you do for them. They don't always remember what you say to them, but they will always remember how you made them feel. So let that guide you in your practice, which is so exciting because you're just getting out and you've got your whole career ahead of you. So kudos and congratulations. And thank you again for allowing me to participate.
I can go next, Caitlin. So I just want to, again, speaking along the same lines, want to reinforce the idea of relationship-based care and the reconciliation that we can do at individual levels and then largely as institutions. From my experience, and from what I have heard and learned from Indigenous populations, the communities, wherever I had opportunity to connect and work, it comes down to relationships. It comes down to how we make the individuals, how we make them feel. And if their voices were heard, if the care was delivered based on what that individual's positionality, what their needs were. So always kind of being mindful of that and developing that critical thinking and reflection onto if some things didn't go as planned, I mean, how I could do better. So focusing on relationships, I think, is the one key learning that I wanted to pass on.
And Dr. Ciriani, do you have any final words?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for having me. It's an honor to speak with this group. Just very, very proud of what all of you do. And I think if we all work at this together, we can make it a much better place, not only dentally, but as a society. So thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you to all of our panelists for their wonderful presentations and for answering our questions. And being here today with us. You know, I'm sure everyone learned a lot, and I sure learned a lot from you, and it was great hearing about your experiences. So we really appreciate you being here. I just want to say another few final thank yous to wrap up. So thank you again to Dr. Ciriani, Dr. Mckinstry, Dr. Singh, Dr. Visconti, and Dr. McNally for sharing your experiences, insight, and wisdom with our students. Thank you to the SPEA chapter presidents and the SPEA Western team for their hard work putting this event together. Thank you to the American College of Dentists for their support. And finally, thank you to everyone for attending.